Hey everybody, this is Giancarlo Alino reporting for Sportskeeda MMA, and I am happy to be joined by my guest today. He is a longtime voice in combat sports. He was a longtime voice to the UFC. He's Mike Goldberg. How you doing, Mike?
I'm good, my friend. It's been a little while. How have you been doing? It sounds like you're killing it, buddy.
Yeah, doing great. It's a great time in MMA, obviously to reflect on and look back, but I just want to get your thoughts. You were at a big event over the weekend, Jake Paul versus Anderson Silva. What were your thoughts on how both guys performed, and what was it like being at the event?
You know, the event had a good feel. It had a good buzz. It's a younger crowd, which Giancarlo's no surprise, with Jake's followers. For the last year, I've been the blow-by-blow, as they say in boxing, but I've been the play-by-play announcer for Pro Box TV with Roy Jones Jr., Paulie Malignaggi, Antonio Tarver. And we had sat down with Jake and done a Zoom interview for our podcast, I want to say about a month ago. So maybe like 2 weeks before the fight. And listening to him now, his vocabulary, the way he talks about boxing, his vernacular is boxing 101. And Paulie Malignaggi, who I also do bare knuckle with, who I happen to think is the best color commentator in the sport of boxing, Paulie picked up on that right away. It's like, I'm going to move my feet. Jake's talking about moving his feet and getting in and pressure, and he's got to lead with the gym. So I'll tell you this. Jake is always going to have haters. I love in the post-fight speech, he said, and I hope I don't mess up the line, but he said, if I were to walk on water, people would say it's because I can't swim. And I'm like, damn, Jake, that's Chael Sonnen like. That's strong. But it's true. He's always going to have haters. He has improved. He's improved drastically. And he's what we call in boxing, he's living the life. Anderson performed like Anderson. I mean, Anderson is the man. He is 48 years old. Fatigue became a factor, but he was putting it on Jake early. He also was tough to hit, which is something in the interview that we asked Jake about, because that's mentally exhausting. So it was impressive in all forms. I mean, I'm a big Anderson Silva guy, as you well know. And I've become a Jake Paul fan, and I like what he is trying to do for the sport of boxing. And again, there was a buzz. And I even got a chance to give, my old friend Nate Diaz a hug and say hello. I hadn't seen him in forever before whatever happened backstage and he and his crew got kicked out. So I got to see Nate before he got kicked out of the building.
And Anderson, like you mentioned there, just how he performed at his age. Like, are you still in awe when you see Anderson Silva go out there and just the way he's able to move, and after all these years competing in combat sports, how he's able just to look so fluid out there?
Absolutely, 100%. The man he is the thing that I admire the most. And many of our martial artists or mixed martial artists have that personality. And you've interviewed a lot of the guys, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. But decades of being a striker. And yeah, it was the art of 8 limbs. And yes, there were takedowns in the cage. But just knowing what's coming or how to set up and how to feint, that doesn't go away. Maybe the speed goes away. The reaction time goes away. The cardio slows down. But being able to know what it's like to attack in a certain sense, to know what it's like to see punches coming and defend against them. Now, maybe he doesn't defend like he did, when he was doing this against Stephan Bonner, because the quickness isn't there. So his mind is saying, I got to get the heck out of the way. And maybe he doesn't do it as often as he would 10 years ago. But yeah, I mean, the guy's an absolute stud. He was in great shape. He brought it to Jake during a lot of the fight. I thought it was a lot closer going into that 8th round before the knockdown. I knew the knockdown was going to give Jake the decision. I thought it was very close going into that final round. Without the knockdown, a lot of people say Jake still would have won. Maybe that's just my love for Anderson, but I thought it was very close. Both men impressed me, and it was a heck of a show. It was a heck of a show.
Yeah, I agree. It was very entertaining to watch as a fan of Anderson Silva, and you got more respect to out of Jake Paul, just the way he was able to perform against a legend like that. But
Gold, and all the build-up, Giancarlo, and all the build-up. I asked Jake during the interview that I did with him, I'm like, there's been no trash talk. And he's like, just like you and I would be, how do you trash talk Anderson Silva?
Yeah.
It's like I always joke, if you're in a domestic disagreement with your better half and she doesn't react, you realize how quickly you sound like an asshole. And you're like, wait, this doesn't work. And that's what Jake basically was like, I love the guy. He's my favorite fighter. There's nothing but respect. And so you didn't see that part of it in the buildup. And Jake's like, they've always come at me. Now, Dana. Yeah, Jake had reason for that in the post-fight speech. But I was really proud to see the growth in and out of the ring of Jake Paul, who grew up one neighborhood away from me on the west side of Cleveland. Obviously, he's much younger. I didn't know him, but I did share that with him on the podcast. And he was like, oh, come on, you got to be kidding. Lorraine Road, Friendly's Ice Cream? Yep, you got it. So, yeah, it was good for both. Jake is a bit silly calling out Canelo Alvarez. Most of the world would be a bit silly calling out Canelo. But hey, I just listened to Michael Bisping talk about it. Why not? Conor decided he was going to call out Floyd. Everybody thought it was kind of silly. $100 million later, turned out to be a pretty good idea.
Well, Goldie, this is a great time to reflect on everything in combat sports because a lot of anniversaries pop up. You look at Twitter, like this day in MMA history, but we're going to be coming on one next month that's going to be special because December 21st will mark 25 years since you became the voice of the UFC. Wow. If you can just take us back to 1997, like how did you get the role as UFC play-by-play?
So I was doing ESPN hockey. I was one of the play-by-play guys at ESPN. I was on the Deuce wearing some bad sweaters. If you watch the documentary that has now been done, Unrivaled, with the Avs and the Red Wings from back in that fight, you'll get a glimpse of my fine hair and dress code back then. But Bruce Connell, may he rest in peace. We lost Brucey way too young. And Brucey, of course, was my producer forever for the UFC. Brucey just said, hey, Goldie, got a gig for you. It's in Japan. You got to take a jiu-jitsu class. And I'm like, oh, okay. All I heard was Japan and gig, and I was in. So I ended up going to Japan. That was my first ever show. And I was told to get off the plane in Narita and get on the Shinkansen, the bullet train. I thought there was going to be bullet train written somewhere. In English, nope. Got on the bullet train, made my way to Shin, Yokohama, Japan. First person I met from a UFC side was Elaine McCarthy, Big John's wife. Elaine was the event coordinator back in the SEG days. She told me R is H in Portuguese. It's Royce, not Royce. And she told me about Elio Gracie and gave me the background. And then also, may he rest in peace, Olympic gold medalist Jeff Blatnick was my partner. And Big John helped to teach me the sport a ton as well. And he's a big brother, always has been, always will be. I went in at first as a guy who would bring enthusiasm and tell stories and do my homework on these fighters. And I'm sitting next to an Olympic gold medalist. So I knew my role to let Jeff do the X's and O's. And I would just try to bring the excitement and, learn on the job. But it was crazy to be in Japan for the first time in my life, to get on this train. And it was cool. It was a bullet train, but then to get off, and I had a big suitcase. I didn't know what to pack. And I swear, Giancarlo, the room was about the size of the laptops we're on right now. And I was like, okay, I can do this. And the rest is history. And honestly, for the next few years, I get Bob Myrowitz, and I think the whole MMA world forgets sometimes. I give Myro a lot of credit because he was on life support on the UFC for a couple of years, and he was losing money. A lot of the money was coming straight from his pocket. There weren't a ton of investors, but he held on long enough to hand it off to Lorenzo and Frank. Dana came in after that, obviously, and here we are today. But Myro could have pulled the plug more than once. We would do shows, Giancarlo, and we'd be like, hey, just have some beers after the show because this might be the last one. This might be the last one. And kept going. You know, Frank and Lorenzo came into the picture and here we are today. And I can't believe 25 years. Wow. 25 years. Yeah, it was fun. It was crazy. Guys in, you know, not girls at that time, just guys in their underwear fighting in a cage. You know, how did this happen? You know, how did this happen?
And at the time, like you were mentioning there, being involved in hockey and being a broadcaster there, I know there was a lot of resistance on the UFC. Like it had a bad reputation. Senator John McCain at the time, like there was a lot of political pushback. So were you worried? Like, was there any reservations about accepting the job that it might impact your jobs in other sports?
Not at the time. And I have to say that, you know, the late Senator John McCain was right. I mean, it was human cockfighting. Now, it was more human cockfighting a couple of years before I came on, you know, because I was my first show was officially called Ultimate Japan. So I don't know if it was 16, 16 and a half, 17, but it didn't have a number, but it was right in that range. No, it wasn't that renegade, or maybe it was that renegade, but it wasn't that viewed and watched because there was no cable pay-per-view that it had me worried that there would be repercussions in the other things that I was doing. Man, when I started the UFC, I was the voice of the Detroit Red Wings. I mean, it was in that same era. So I was good with it. Now, it's interesting you say that. When the WWE came calling, you know, whatever it was, a decade later, I did sit down with my broadcast mentor, George Greenberg at Fox, and told him about it and said, hey, can I still be your college football host? And he said, Goldie, I'm good with it, but I don't know. It was still the Big Eight at that time. I don't know what the Big Eight would say. So there was more of a concern if I would have made that move, but that was more because the popularity of the WWE was massive compared to where the UFC was, where I started. And let's face it, that is a soap opera for men. MMA is a real fight. And was I ever sure it would gain acceptance and become mainstream? Not so much. But once Lorenzo said that was going to happen, I knew it would eventually, because I knew what kind of leader we had in Lorenzo Fertitta.
So Uncle Chael's son in there, that rumor he put out there that was true all those years ago.
It was true all those years ago.
And was there did you actually consider being that voice of Monday Night Raw, or was there you know what, I'm going to stay in the UFC because of what we built so far?
You know, the way you just phrased that is perfect, is perfect, because the first part of it is yes, because I'm a Hulk Hogan guy, man. I'm a Gene Okerlund guy. Mean Gene. I'll tell you what, Mean Gene, you know, and Mean Gene's son is a hockey player. And as you well know, we've talked about it before, my DNA is hockey. I mean, Todd Okerlund played on the 1984 U.S. Olympic hockey team. I was a huge fan. You know, we all put in our $5 to watch WrestleMania, you know, back when I was in college, the first ever WrestleMania. So I was very honored by the offer from the WWE. But the second part of what you just said nails perfectly what my emotions were at the time. And that was this boat that was out in all this tumultuous water, and we had no idea what we were doing. And for a while, the boat wasn't really that nice, was about to find an island. And there was a chance that island could be pretty nice. And I have relationships. I was with Brucey. He was my producer. You know, a lot of friends in the UFC. I've been there a long time. And that was the ultimate reason, no pun intended, is that I was established with the UFC. I did feel as, you know, part of a family, because we were very much a tight-knit family at the time. And I wanted to see where the voyage was going to go. And thus I ended up, you know, staying with the UFC. I straight out talked to Lorenzo and Dana. It was never a secret. I told them what the UFC was offering. And it's funny, looking way back, Dana did the math real quickly. He's like, oh, hey, look, those numbers you're going to do 50 shows, Goldie. Get a calculator out, bro. They're not paying you more than us. And And that wasn't really, it wasn't all about that, but I father 2 kids, you know, you think about your future and your family and taking care of your babies. And 25, 22, they're still my babies. They always will be. So yeah, I'm very honored, but very much like you said, I wanted to see where the journey was going to continue. And Rogan was hilarious because we had a Monday Spike show and I was to start the next Monday. And Joe the whole night kept saying, dude, you're not going to go do porn. You're not going to leave me and do porn, are you? And then you look at Joe today, right? Like, come on. He's like, good. And Joe was very instrumental. Joe went up after that show. It was at the Hard Rock. And he went up to Dana and Lorenzo. They had a room on site because of the event. And he just said, I love working with Goldie. I don't want to work with some other schmo. Don't let him go. He's great at what he does. And we have a great relationship. Don't let him go. And I'll always be thankful to Joe for that. Always thankful for Joe for that, because it helped them. I think it helped to reinforce with my bosses at the UFC that, you know, let's keep this guy here. Let's keep this guy here. Then I got a phone call from Vince McMahon. It's the one message I wish I would have saved. Mike, Vince McMahon, I think you owe Kevin an explanation on why you were so close to a deal and you pulled out at the last minute. Please give Kevin Dunn a call. And I was like, damn. And I played it for Dana. I don't think Dana was ever more proud of me than that moment, because he felt like he beat Vince, right? Vince tried to steal me and I stayed. I should have saved that message. It was, and that's not to be disrespectful to Vince McMahon. It was just kind of like, holy shit, that's Vince McMahon on my voicemail. And it was an interesting time, but ultimately I made the right decision.
That's great. And also, like, the UFC, I remember at the time, like, the Ultimate Fighter was coming up, and like there was all these big fights like Tito versus Chuck Liddell. That was like the big one on pay-per-view, and everybody was becoming a household name. At one point, did you like maybe reflect on at the time, like you were talking about before, how after the shows you would feel like maybe this is our last one? When did you find that this sport's going to be on in a long time and the UFC is going to be one of the biggest combat sports in the world?
So we were brought out, a group of us, Bruce, you know, my producer, Brucey was one of them. We were brought out to Vegas to meet Lorenzo and Frank and Dana. Didn't realize how truly successful they were in business at the time. We just knew these Vegas guys with a lot of money were taking us over. And we were in this back room at an Italian restaurant. And I remember it like yesterday, Giancarlo. Lorenzo said, hey, any questions? And I wasn't a frequent Vegas guy at the time either. And you know, you come down the elevator in Vegas, there's all these billboards of everything going on. And I just said, will we ever be on the billboard? Well, a decade later, we're in Times Square flashing up and down with John Jones looking 100 foot tall. That was all I wanted to know at the time. One of the first events that was significant was when President Trump, you know, when we were hosted in Atlantic City. That was like a big deal because that was a little bigger than Lake Charles, Louisiana, or you know, Casino Magic in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi. That was part of it. We were already kind of kicking ass, but I will never forget being in your backyard and having 80,000 people at Sky Dome, because I had done baseball there. I had done the CFL there. I'd done hockey across the street from there. I love Tio. You know, my ex is Canadian. I'm a hockey player. I love being up there, as you well know. I love you, brother. You know, you're a great human being. So that was one of them when I really was like, wow, this is working. When Anheuser-Busch came aboard, I knew that was significant, because we literally at one point, Giancarlo, we had a sponsor, Nyla Bone dog shoes. No word of a lie. No word of a lie. And by Nyla Bone dog shoes. What the f are Nyla Bone dog shoes? So when AB came on, I knew that it was something special. But the best hire and the most influential man in the success of the UFC, especially domestically, is Mark Ratner. And Lorenzo knows that. I mean, Lorenzo was on the Nevada State Athletic Commission with Mark. Mark was the commissioner at the time. Mark's the one who dealt with Tyson biting Holyfield's ear off. But Mark, in addition to John and his background in police and law enforcement, in Jeff Blatnick being an Olympic gold medalist, Lorenzo being an amazing businessman, as they went state to state, there was acceptance because there was validity with a lot of these commissions, because they're like, you know what? If Ratner is saying this is okay, Mark Ratner, he shoots straight. If Mark Ratner is saying this is okay, then we'll give it a chance in our state. And we grew there. And then I remember Lorenzo saying we were going to have global dominance, and he left his role at Station Casinos. Frank took that full time. Lorenzo focused all of his, basically 20 hours a day with Zuffa in the UFC. And, a year or so later, we're in Abu Dhabi, putting up a stadium. We do the show and they tore it down. They have so much money there. They tore it down the next day, put it up the next time we came. So yeah, it built itself as we worked our way up, but the Ultimate Fighter was also the turning point in a lot of ways. And Forrest and Stefan in that fight, I remember looking at Frank after that fight, like, holy crap. And I'm like, two contracts. Now, I'm not going to say it was my idea. People forget they did give both of them contracts at the time. And Diego Sanchez beat a chubby, and Kenny would laugh if you heard me, because Kenny was 185 back then. Beat a chubby Kenny Florian. But that was when I knew we were going someplace, because we were now on normal TV, if you will, on Spike. It wasn't just pay-per-view. So the cult audience that kept us alive was being built in the mainstream, and it just continued to go from there. And we would go to these places, Giancarlo, and I honestly, now that I've been away from it and been able to step back for a few years to reflect on that journey, is fascinating. It's one of the greatest success stories in business, and not because 2 million became 4.2 billion. It's because a sport that was, deemed so renegade and so wrong and so animalistic by so many was now being embraced as much as the Big Four, and on the same networks as the Big Four. And I'm very honored to have been, as many people have said, the soundtrack of that journey. It was unbelievably fascinating and unbelievably enjoyable.
And also, like, you brought a great point there, and like just mentioning Toronto and how big that was, that stadium environment. Like in North America, the UFC at the time, they're still trying to get into other states. And that was the first one when Ontario lifted that ban, and they came into Toronto. New York was another interesting one, because for the longest time, I would always see Dana White on YouTube press conferences talking about Madison Square Garden, but there seemed to be a disconnect, and maybe they needed to be educated on it, like the New York State, on their views of MMA. So when that finally lifted, like, how did you and the rest of the UFC brass feel about that?
It's funny because we did at least a half dozen shows at the Prudential Center in Newark, and we would have our press conferences and fighter appearances at Radio Hall. We had the big billboards on Times Square. We were only, the Hudson away from, basically being in New York City. So it's almost like our marketing and our push towards the state of New York was pretty heavy, other than Fight Night, when we were right across the street, if you will, at the Rock in Newark. Getting legislated in the state of New York had a lot more to do with the Fertitta's base business in Station Casinos, in culinary, in unions, and how they handle unions in Nevada and how they handle unions in New York. I believe in my heart that was more of a hang up, if you will. That was more of a delay, was that there were very high ups in the state of New York, and Lorenzo, with all of his businesses, very prominent in the state of Nevada. It wasn't as much about fighting and fighter safety. It was more like, hey, if you're going to come to our state, you got to clean up some of the other things you're doing, because our culinary union doesn't like your culinary union. And if I'm wrong, I apologize to both culinary unions. because other than the two words culinary union, I don't know much more what that means. But I do know that that was a factor as much as anything. But of course, bro, walking into the world's most famous arena, Madison Square Garden, like, come on. I mean, yeah, but we were already there. We were already halfway around the world. We'd already done shows in London. The UFC was already there when we went to New York. But was it a special moment? Was it a huge accomplishment? Without a doubt. That place is, I think about calling games back in the day, Maple Leaf Garden, man. I mean, that place, it's the world's most famous arena. And I called Rangers games there. I did college basketball there. I was a sideline reporter for the Bulls, all those great series against the Knicks in the early 90s at MSG. So to walk in there and see the Octagon up, that was pretty darn cool. That was pretty darn cool.
And also, like, being the voice of the UFC, you've basically had the best seat in the house to some of the greatest moments, greatest fights, seen the best fighters up close and personal. I won't ask you to pick a favorite fighter, but was there a moment where you found yourself circling your calendar when a particular fighter or fighters would be competing? Absolutely.
Absolutely. I would say that my favorite fighter is Anderson, in and out of the octagon and the things that he did, the way he fought in the Matrix. Also a huge, very close with BJ Penn. Baby J was just an animal. I remember Rich Franklin, math teacher to, middleweight champion. And he's a Buckeye like I am. I was born in Cincinnati. I spent some of my high school years up in Cleveland, but I'm a Cincinnati boy. Rich is Cincinnati boy. But I would circle the calendar when Rampage was fighting or Vanderlei was fighting. And which is funny because I was just talking about this with somebody at a boxing show that I broadcast a couple of weeks ago. Leonard Garcia was fighting. And you probably like, why Leonard? Because Leonard Garcia always came a bit down on the mouthpiece. Win, lose, or draw, he was going to put on a show. But when Rampage would be walking in or Vanderlei would be doing this, it was like something really, really violent, but not in a negative way. Something very massive could happen any minute. Like whenever Rampage would throw that left hook, I'd think of Clubber Lang, man. And like the sound effects from the Rocky movie, and him just missing. So there were fights like that I definitely circled because I was always excited about it. The brilliance of Anderson always mesmerized me. The brilliance of John Jones was off the charts. The way that he was able to fight in that self-created bubble and keep people off of him and dominate the way he did. I remember calling Alexander Gustafsson's fight in Stockholm and saying, this will be the first real challenge to John Jones someday. And I got killed on social, like always. And then what was one of the greatest fights in Toronto, obviously Gus and Jonesy, because one guy's 6'4", one guy's 6'5". Plain and simple, just look at the body. That's all I was saying is Gus is long enough to reach him. And he did. So yeah, there were times when there was a ton of excitement, but the special ones were definitely a Rampage or a Vanderlei when you knew violence was going to occur, and the highlight reel knockout was probably shortly to come thereafter.
I agree with you. Those are some great selections there. But before we wrap up here and let you go, how can our viewers here at Sportskeeda MMA follow you on social media and stay up to date with everything you're doing in combat sports?
Oh, you're the man. You're always so kind in letting me do a little plug. Goldie on TV. I'm Goldie on TV. I guess I'll always be Goldie on TV when people say, hey, Mike, I don't even turn around. I don't know who they're talking to. Now I have to remember, wait, that's my real name is Mike. Okay. All right. I'm Goldie on TV, Twitter and IG. I've been working with ProBox TV for the last year, having a ton of fun. Working with Paulie Malignaggi is an absolute blessing for me in the sport of boxing, yes, but in sports commentary, because I happen to believe very strongly that Paulie's the best in boxing. And he's also a little renegade like Joe, obviously. Paulie says what's on his mind. So it brings me back to those great days with Joe and Joe's great knowledge of the sport, and now Paulie's great knowledge of his sport. And Joe's talked about Paulie many times on his podcast about how good Paulie Malignaggi is. And then I'm sitting next to Superman, Giancarlo. Sitting next to freaking Roy Jones Jr. And he called me Goldilocks. And I'm like, oh my God, I haven't heard that since I was a kid. He goes, no, not in the Three Bears. He says, because you're golden and I picture you with dreadlocks. And I'm like, it's like Wolf of Wall Street. I wanted to say to Roy, like, hold on, could you say that again, but just a little bit more slowly so that I can get it on tape? Kind of like the lost Vince McMahon message. And then the next show, Giancarlo, he turns at me before the open. He's like, how's my tie? And I'm fixing Superman's tie. And I'm like, somebody's got to be freaking recording this. It's Roy Jones Jr. So as you can tell, I'm a little kid when it comes to that. I'm doing bare knuckle as well with Paulie, BYB Extreme. We were just in London. We had a tremendous show. We got to attend Clarissa Shields and Savannah Marshall in that great card the night before at the O2 with the passing of the Queen. That date changed, happened to correspond with our Sunday show. So yeah, I'm Goldie on TV. I'm active. I'm keeping busy. I'm open. I'm available to hire. If the WWE calls, I'm saying yes this time. And I'd love to get back into hockey at some point too. That truly is my DNA. But yeah, Goldie on TV. Check out Pro Box TV. We've had some great fights. And bare knuckle, I get to say it's all over pretty much every fight. So that's kind of fun as well.
Really appreciate that. And I highly recommend everybody give you a follow. It's a very great follow because you get to see all the stuff you're doing. But Mike, I'd like to thank you for sharing your time and coming on here, Sportskeeda MMA, and sharing all these stories and reflecting on 25 years of your combat sports debut. Thanks a lot.
My absolute pleasure. And I've said this to you each time we've been able to visit. Congratulations on your success. And congratulations on your continuing success as you continue to evolve and more people realize what you bring to the sport with the interviews that you do and your passion. So keep killing it. I consider you a friend. And obviously, when you reached out for me to do this, there was no hesitation at all. My response was anything for you, brother. So the admiration is mutual, my friend.
Thank you so much.